Joining us now from Washington, Bob Shrum. Let's talk about the politics of this. And soon we'll be joined by John Feehery, Republican strategist. Shrum, let's talk about first the abortion debate on health care and then the foreign policy. Does it look to you now, given what's happening with the markup, that they're going to get some scaled back health care bill, or is this thing headed for disaster as far as the White House is concerned?
I think they will get a health care bill. I think what comes out of the Finance Committee will have to be amended to some extent in the Senate floor, put together with a House bill. That would be the real moment of danger if somehow or other you couldn't put a House and a Senate bill together. But I think Democrats are all too mindful of what happened in 1994 after the health care bill crashed under Bill Clinton. And they went into that election and they were punished badly by voters. Obama's going to be okay one way or another because this economy is going to get better. By the time you get to 2012, I think voters are going to be voting on that. But I think Democrats in Congress, especially some of these so-called moderates and blue dogs, would pay a heavy price if they didn't support a bill.
Now, and when you turn to foreign policy, Bob, this is a big test. The officials here acknowledge it as well. Big test of Barack Obama's diplomatic engagement with adversaries, with Iran. And just now we've confirmed from officials here that the Iranian foreign minister is in Washington. They say not for talks with any officials, that he'll be going to the intersection. That is one step, as you know, below an embassy. We don't have diplomatic relations with Iran, but it's pretty interesting that the Iranian foreign minister is in Washington, D.C. That does not happen. So we're moving towards engagement. There were 6 days of talks in Havana, unannounced, but the Cubans invited the U.S. officials who were down there for routine talks to stay for an additional 6 days. And this U.S. diplomat had pretty high-level talks, including talks about dissidents and talks with human rights activists. Things are happening. It's a big change.
Oh, I think it's a very big change. It turns out the president meant it when he quoted JFK during the campaign and said, we'll never negotiate out of fear, but we'll never fear to negotiate. And if you look at this Iranian situation, the whole course of development seems to validate the Obama foreign policy. Years and years and years of the Bush administration refusing to talk or engage, and the U.S. was pretty much isolated in the world. Now you have the support of the French, you have the support of the British, you have Russia much more open to doing something. China's still a problem. But I think in the international community, you have achieved a much more united front because Obama's been willing to talk with the Iranians. And I think if the talks don't work out, we're going to have much more support for whatever has to be done.
John Feehery joining us now from Capitol Hill. What's wrong with the policy as Bob Shrum announced it, or do you agree with what the president is doing?
You know, let me put it this way. I hope it all works out. I think that the biggest concern I have is that there's so little trust in Israel, and if these talks do break down, it can make the situation even worse. The other problem I have is, does Ahmadinejad and the Iranians, do they actually, when they engage, do they actually listen to us, or are they just playing us? And that's the big concern I think a lot of people have, not only here in the United States, but also in Israel. Are they just playing with us, stalling for time? Now, I think there's a lot of other things going on. Hopefully, what will happen is that these talks yield results. I'm very hopeful that that happens. If it doesn't, I'm very concerned of the consequences.
John Feehery, the whole possibility of sanctions. What if the United States has to go ahead with sanctions? Will that be something that you think Republicans on Capitol Hill will support, or will they call for military action, something that the Pentagon says would not work?
Well, I think that what Republicans are going to call for are sanctions that work. Now, if we can't go it alone, we can't do it unilaterally. If the sanctions, we do these sanctions, and it's only us and the British and the French, and the Russians and the Chinese don't join in, and there's huge gaps there, what's the point? Let's make sure that if we do sanctions, and I think we are already doing sanctions, if we increase sanctions, let's make sure that they actually work.
Bob, let me ask you to turn to Afghanistan, because the president is meeting with his foreign policy and military advisors today. Right. And he's somewhat in a box because they're talking now about not deciding on the numbers of troops that would be needed. The Pentagon isn't even giving him the troop request that came in over the weekend until they decide what the strategy is. But they outlined a strategy in March, and already they say that the situation on the ground changed enough that they have to revisit it.
Well, obviously, Afghanistan's become a much more difficult situation in the last few months. We're in the odd position of protesting the Iranian election and somehow or other having to defend an election in Afghanistan where in many places there were more ballots cast than there were people, where ballots were 100% in some regions for one candidate. I think, and militarily, there's been real deterioration with the Taliban coming back. I think it's incumbent on the president, before he goes forward, to ask what I call the Clark Clifford questions. Which happened in 1968, as you recall, when there was a request for a lot more troops in Vietnam. He was brought in. He was supposedly going to validate that request. Instead, he asked the military a bunch of tough questions. How long is it going to take? What's the objective? How many troops are you going to need? Are you going to come back for more? And more troops than you're asking for now. And when he didn't get satisfactory answers, he went to President Johnson and said, we need to stop the escalation. We need to stop the bombing. We need to move in a different direction.
Bob Shrum, John Feehery, Iran, Afghanistan, and healthcare. Thanks for covering all topics. Talk to you soon.